The oral tradition of storytelling is the oldest of all of our traditions. Long before the flute, the rattle, and even the drum, there were storytellers. And unlike today, those storytellers were not thought of as just entertainers. They were teachers and historians. Having no written language, it was storytelling that preserved our legends, our history, and much of our culture. But storytelling was also used as a method of teaching the young ones, and sometimes reminding the not-so-young ones how to live in a good way.
Are we live? There we are. I think we are live now. Hi, you guys. I think we are live now. Yeah. Sorry, we're on Res Wi-Fi again, and sometimes when we're playing the video, we never know what's happening. But thank you for tuning in for another show here at Clifford Watney School, CWS Indigenous Storytelling, and yeah, I know you guys. Did say Ruben Little Head. Ruben actually ran into some vehicle problems, so he had to pull out last minute. And we did have a backup here with Patrick Midswing. So very happy with that. But if we can get you guys to do us a favor and start sharing this video, because man, the first 2 days have been on fire, and guaranteed our next guest here, Patrick Midswing, is just going to continue that momentum and that energy. But we're going to get right to it, man, and welcome our guest here, Mr. Patrick Midswing. Hey, give him a little.
That was a pretty wicked intro there. I loved it.
You like that? You like that? Oh, the video one or my voice?
Both. Yeah, both was awesome. That's really cool.
Hey, man. Hey, welcome to the show. And like again, you guys, can you start sharing this video right now? We need to get it out there, get it out to everywhere. And anyone that is not on Facebook, you can tell them to go on YouTube right now and go in the search bar and type in IOPPS. That's my channel, and this is where we're broadcasting as well for those that are not on YouTube or not on Facebook. But yeah, let's get right to it, man. So Pat, thank you for stepping in last minute, man.
For sure. And to fill in for Ruben Little Head, that's some big shoes to fill. But I'm gonna do my best out there for everyone that's watching. And so last minute here, Nate sent me a text saying, "Hey man, can you come on?" So I love connecting with youth, and I love connecting with our people. So definitely wanted to make myself available for this. And we're looking for kind of topics of what we would actually talk about and share. And one of the things that I spent a great deal of my life in is the area of powwow and fancy dancing in particular. And so I could just go on, right, and just get into it.
Man. Oh man, go start it off.
All right, and then just stop me if you have any questions. But I love kind of telling my origin story of fancy dance. I've told it many times, but when I was young, my dad left when I was 4 years old, and I've never heard from him ever since. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know how he's doing. No Merry Christmas, no happy birthdays, nothing like that. And that always affected me in some way. And shortly after that, my mom left. And so I was in a place where aunties and uncles became mom and dad. And I look back at that time, and I feel very fortunate that one of the families that I ended up living with was a traditional family. All of a sudden, I was in a home where Cree language was spoken, sweat lodge ceremonies, round dances, sun dances, and summertime was the time for powwow season. And I remember I was 8 years old when I moved in with my Uncle Roy and my Auntie Irene. And they asked me, to get ready to go to a powwow. And so there I was, 8 years old, packed up my stuff into the van, and we drove to my very first powwow that I've ever went to. And for me, I thought it was like a fair or a festival, because that's things that I went to that looked very familiar as we were pulling up to the powwow. And
Mm.
I remember it so clearly. Like, the sky was blue, it was a nice sunny day, and there was kids running around. And this is back when Ramsey's Pony Rides had their horses, and they brought their horses out and you could go for horse rides. And it didn't take long for me, a little young kid, to make friends and start running around. But I didn't go look at the powwow or the dancing. I thought it was fun just to be on the outside. And then there was a moment where it was during the day, and I heard the crowd cheering, and I was so interested. I was like, what are they cheering about? And so I went running towards the arbor. Being a little skinny kid, I kind of passed all the big crowd all the way up front. And what I seen mesmerized me, and it's one of two times that time slowed down for me. And as time slowed down, I seen these dancers dancing around, and these colors were all blurring, and they were spinning and they were dancing. And what I witnessed was the men's fancy dance, and I was totally blown away. I remember pointing at this dance and saying, I don't know what this is, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm gonna figure out what this is, and I'm gonna do that. And I remember after the powwow, it was on the Monday. I lived in Makwasagagan First Nation, and we have some large lakes around our area. And I remember these dancers, they had feathers, so there was no YouTube or there was no Facebook to figure out how these dancers looked. So I had to go off memory. And I remember they had all these feathers. So what I did was I jumped on my bike, and I drove my bike to the lake, and I gathered up all the seagull feathers that I could find, because I remember that's where there were feathers. And I had a good pile of them. And I came home, and I grabbed some sticks on the ground, some strings, duct tape, and I made my own pair of dancing sticks just off of memory, because there was no YouTube and Facebook to look at how to make sticks or how they even look like. But I remember they were like nunchucks, spinning them around. I thought of
Old
Michelangelo
ways.
from the
Old ways.
Ninja Turtles. Yeah. But then I had my sticks, and they were all gray and white, seagull feathers. And I was like, how do you get all these colors on there? And I had this idea. I was like, okay. And I ran inside, and I grabbed the chair, and I went on top of the drawer on top of the fridge. I opened it up, and I grabbed all my uncle's bingo dabbers, and I started bingo dabbering all these feathers to make a nice set of colorful dancing sticks. And then my uncle he had these whole collection of cassette tapes from powwows, and I looked through them, and I found this one where it said men's fancy dance live at Skimitzen, something like that. And it was Kozad. And so we had this shop right by the house. It was an empty shell, just basically a building with a shell. And I would go in there, and me and my brother Nathan, we'd play these powwow songs, and we'd practice every day. And I was so in love with this dance right off the hop. And the cool thing about this tape was it was recorded live, so you could hear the cheering in the background. So I'd practice, and I would stop, and I'd hear the cheering, like how you had in the beginning of the video.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it at the time, but what I was doing was I was causing myself to visualize a future that could be. And I was so committed to this future that I was creating for myself, that one day I could be a dancer, and the crowd's gonna cheer for me. And I held that vision for so long, but it wouldn't be till about 8, 9, 10, 5 years later. So I practiced for 5 years, and we were at Thunderchild Powwow. We set up camp, and it was my birthday, July 23rd. On my 13th birthday, Uncle Roy says, "Hey, my man, let's go for a walk." And so we went for a walk, and we went to this guy's camp, and he had these big long cars. You remember those old cars where the trunk is as big as some full cars today.
I actually seen one yesterday, man. It had the strings holding down the trunk, man. I was like, nah.
Yeah, right. And they open up the trunk, and they pull out this purple fancy dance outfit. And I remember my eyes went super huge, my jaw dropped, and I just couldn't believe it that I got a fancy dance outfit. And now it was for real. So all my practice that I was doing for 5 years, I had to put it into play. And so I started off in teen boys fancy. I didn't start off in juniors or tiny tots like a lot of these, world champion dancers that have been dancing all their lives. Um, and so I went out there, and then what I didn't realize that, dancing with an outfit, when you have things tied to your legs and your neck and your arms and this weight, is a lot different from practicing with your clothes on in a shell of a building. And so naturally, everything that could go wrong went wrong. My moccasin flew off one time, my leggings, my apron fell off. One time I was spinning so fast that my bottom bustle flew off. My roach went sideways, everything. I tore muscles, I hurt myself. And what I took from that was a good lesson in my life, was knowing that when you have a dream, when you have a goal, that things are going to go wrong, and you just got to expect it and to learn from it. And
Oh,
so
definitely, man.
I learned how to take care of my outfit a little better. I learned how to tie things up a little better and take my time when I'm doing things and make sure my roach is tied on. And a big lesson I had was I asked questions to other fancy dancers. And some fancy dancers I really looked up to at that time was like Dustin Strongarm, Preston Little Tent, Laz Roan. So these were the people in my area, and I would ask them, like, how do you tie up your bustle? And I'd see how they did it. It was so different than how I did it. And the way I was doing it, my bustles kept falling apart when I was dancing. And so you learn from people who are at a position that you want to be, and you model off of them, right?
Surround
Tony
yourself. Surround
Robbins,
yourself.
yeah. Surround yourself from people who are winners and champions.
Mm, mm.
And so I learned a lot of lessons from talking to other fancy dancers, and practiced a lot. And so that vision that I had of people cheering for me, um, I always held it. And when I didn't have my parents around, I had this dream that when I knew I was gonna be a father one day. And I had this dream that when I become a dad, that I was gonna do everything I could to make sure that we had a strong family, basically, and they had everything that they could have that I didn't have growing up. And so when I did start a family, and I met Marissa, my wife, and we had our baby boy Leland. This ties into POW so much, so I'll tie it together. But we were struggling. We're struggling in our life. We were living in Avenue T South, Saskatoon, in an apartment building, and I just couldn't figure out, as a man, as a provider, how to take care of my family. And the only thing I was really good at was powwow. I spent so much time dancing, I spent so much time practicing, and that was, at that time, that was the only really positive thing in my life that I was good at. And so uh, we I figured out that I didn't believe in myself as much as I do now, anyway. And I carried that when I danced powwow, where I was like, going to a powwow, and if I seen certain dancers, I'd be like, oh man, I lost. And so I'd already lose before I even danced, before I even competed. And I had to look back at the way I thought, and I found out that I was losing before I even lined up for contest, because I was so intimidated by all these dancers that come from big powwow family names, and they've been dancing a lot longer than I have. And so I minimized myself. And to get past that, I started doing a few things. I started practicing more. I started visualizing myself as a dancer that I wanted to be, and I started working on my inner self. And when I talk to elders now, like one of my elders I talk to is Tommy Christian, and
Oh, we
from
had him on yesterday, man.
nice,
Fire.
yeah, from Poplar, Montana. And he's like,
Yeah.
he even has a good article on powwows.com, talks about you have to start from the inside out and work from the inside, and be able to look at yourself internally, and how you think, how you look at the world, how you look at yourself. And for me, at that time, I was looking at myself so low of myself. I didn't believe in myself. I had low confidence. And I started to change that, and that was by a lot of journaling, a lot of writing, vision boards. And one of the biggest things that I did, and I kept till this day, was I stopped listening to news, or watching news, stopped listening, reading newspapers. I cut a lot of things that I was feeding myself, because that was my mental food.
Mm.
And I replaced it with sitting with elders, with reading books, with powerful audios. And literally my mind started to shift when I went to powwows. After that, I
Mm.
started to think of myself as a champion, and feel like a champion, and believe I was a champion. And when I started to go into that energy, I started to win. And it wasn't like first place. It was like, fourth place, third place, and then I'd win a special. And I to me, I gave that a meaning, because I changed my thoughts, and I connected it that way. And I was excited. We were starting to get a little bit of traction in our life. I was able to start paying off some bills. And they say at powwows, to not to make powwow a career. But I went down that path. I really didn't have a plan B. And and so I dedicated myself to dancing, and to wanting to be a champion. And I know Tommy Christian says you can't be rich being a dancer, and he's absolutely true. No matter how much money you make, if you win first place or anything like that, you find yourself always helping other people or giving back in some way. And when I became a champion, I I found myself doing that a lot. So, when dancers don't place and families need help getting to the next powwow, to be able to give back and to help other people, and just to make sure you can make it to the next powwow. But kind of how I was able to create a career out of powwow was I started, you know, looking for different avenues of how I could monetize and stay in my culture, because I had this ultimate dream where if I could just live within my culture and find a way to make a living at it, man, then that I'll be a happy man, because I didn't want to be in an office. I didn't want to work in the white man's world. I wanted to be surrounded by my culture. And so I was like, well, I can make bustles. I could learn bustle making. And so this is a whole new task of a goal that I wanted to do. And I already had a framework of how to be successful, because I did it with powwow dancing. So I was like, I can just ask questions. So I went up to bustle makers and I was like, how do you do this? And so Amos Yazzie taught me his bustle making process. Nolan Smallboy and Eric Mentuck, and I started learning from all these experts on how to make bustles. And again, you make mistakes along the way and you just adjust. And so I started making bustles and I started getting orders all over the place. And that was really, really cool, because that helped me to not have to get a job, and I could still dance and just be a craft maker or an artist. And so I was like, okay, now we're getting by. This is good. Well, I'm taking care of my family now. I'm surrounded by my culture. I get to make bustles. I get to dance. But I wanted to figure out how could I get to the next level. I keep thinking, like, what else could I do? How else could I serve the people? And so I found myself contacting schools. So I'm trying to think back of what I did. And I was like, hey, I'm a dancer. I'm an Indigenous artist. Maybe I could come into your school and do a performance. And I started doing it for free, just to get my name out there. And I know a lot of artists, they don't take that approach, but I wanted to show what kind of value I could give to people. And so I started getting booked for schools, and I would dance, and I would teach the dancing. And because I was going to powwow so much and talking with elders, I started hearing the stories about powwow and the origin stories of different things, different dance styles, and learning about the drum, learning about songs, learning about different areas of where I traveled. And so I would I'd basically take that information, and I would share it at schools. And they seem to get a lot of value out of that they would started talking to other schools. And so I started getting booked. And then I started charging a small fee because I was getting so much feedback and bookings that added to another kind of avenue for me to just live in my culture, which was really cool. And so from there I was like, okay, now I'm doing performances, and like Northern Cree started calling me up to go and do some performances with them, and colleges and even small towns to do their whole events. And I was like, man, I really need to learn these stories if I'm going to be teaching it, and kind of really know what it is that I'm talking about, because I would just go off memory of what I heard at powwows.
Mm.
And but I had this idea, so I'm just condensing my whole story here, but
Yeah.
I had this idea at that time as well, that maybe we could create an exhibit or or someplace central where people could just come and learn these stories. And that's where our museum exhibit came to be, as a thought that instead of me going everywhere and going to towns and teaching these stories, that I could just create something that people could come to us. And so I was scrolling on Facebook one day, and I seen this proposal for submissions from the museum locally here. I was like, yeah, man, maybe I could try for that. And so I wrote a proposal up. Took me about a day, and I sent it out, and I didn't hear anything back. So I just kind of thought, maybe they didn't want to do it. And it wasn't until a year later that they called me up and said, hey, we had your proposal sitting on our desk for a while, and we just weren't sure how we could do it. And so maybe you could come sit down with us and we'll talk about it. And I remember
And this is the museum?
this is at the museum in Red Deer here.
Oh, okay.
And we got so excited. We're like, oh man, this is a cool opportunity. We might be able to do this. And so we went to the museum, we sat with them, and they loved it. They said, let's figure out how we could do it. And so I came back a week later with artists basically lined up, because when you travel, you start making like a powwow family, and people people you see all the time. And I know this is the same thing as rodeo people, or people in a certain niche like track and field or gymnast and sports, right? You start seeing the same people when you're traveling. And so we knew a lot of artists, and we knew a lot of people who could do what this whole project was. And so I came back with a week later saying, well, I have my artists lined up, I have the budgets. And they weren't expecting that. They were expecting this to maybe be a 2-year project or a 3-year project. But I was like, I could get it done in a year. And they were like kind of in shock. But I just knew, from traveling, that all the amazing Indigenous artists that are out there, right? And I know you had some of them on your podcast, but um, so we got it done. We got the budgets made. We paid out all the artists to create all different things. But a cool thing was, part of this exhibit, I I I said we would go and get the stories of the dancers. And so what we did was, like Jingle Dress, we went to um, Shelda Tom, right? Her family is the origins of the women's jingle, and we got those original stories of
Yeah.
each dance category based on where it was from and where the stories
Wow.
originated from, which was really cool. And so I got to sit down with a bunch of people, and the one that I was excited about, obviously, was Men's Fancy. And I sat down with Michael Roberts from Ada, Oklahoma,
Mm.
and asked them, what's Men's Fancy? Where does it come from? And here I am. I've been dancing for about 17 years at that time, and finally hearing, a really, really thorough story of Men's Fancy dancing. And so we got the exhibit up.
17 years and you finally heard the story.
Yeah, you would kind of
Wow.
hear it. You would kind of hear it, here and there,
Yeah.
bits and pieces of it. And so before I sat down with Mike, it was more of me just kind of piecing those little pieces together,
Mm.
and knowing that it originates from like the horse, right? The horse spirit, the way that horse moves, and also has story connections with the Wild West show with Buffalo Bill. And it's cool because all the stories I'm reading connect to Buffalo Bill. So I just finished reading Black Elk, and before that, I finished reading Crazy Horse, and they were talking about the Wild West show in there and how they went traveling all over the place doing shows. So these were the original gig masters, Black Elk and all these people, and they got to travel around the world dancing, and
Yeah.
when they're telling their stories of their gigs, it kind of reminds me of nowadays too, when we do our gigs now. But Michael, he was talking about the tribes back in Oklahoma. They used to fight amongst each other,
Mm.
and one of the tribes, they got introduced to the horse, and so you can automatically assume that, and the story goes that the tribe with the horse has the advantage, right? They're moving
Mm.
around faster, they can cover more ground, and so it was a lopsided battle, and so they decided to have a truce, right? A treaty. And a lot of our tribes have had treaties before the treaty
Yeah.
that we know about, right? And part of that treaty was to trade songs for the horse. And so they traded the songs and items of personal value, and then the other tribe got the horse now. And what they realized was, when they started singing these songs, that the horses, they started to move around, and they started to gallop and kick the dirt up and things like that. And
Mm.
the little kids were watching the horses, and they started to mimic what those horses were doing. And the old people used to get mad at the kids and say, "Hey, you guys, you don't dance to those songs, those are for the horses." And they're claiming that. And kids, right, they don't listen sometimes, and they just do what they want to do, and they kept dancing to it. And they started to move around like how they did, jumping around, jumping on the ground. And if you observe a horse, man, they're powerful creatures. They run fast, they jump high, they move around, they're
Mm.
agile,
Yeah.
right? And so they started to do that dance, and the kids just kept doing it and doing it, and it evolved into a fancy dance. And it's pretty cool, because I was reading how I seen a picture of I think Gus McDonald back in the day in the 50s, and he's
Mm.
the first world champion men's fancy, and he has this big trophy. And that was the time in the era around our era where we were just allowed to do ceremonies again,
Yeah.
and because we were just doing it in a gimuche that time, just
Mm.
secretly.
Mm.
And so they were already having their fancy dance championship during that time. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool, man. And so what about like the stuff we wear and the roaches? And he's like, well, that porcupine hair, it signifies aggression. And when you're going to battle, you have to be aggressive, and when you go out there. And
I'm
so
gonna
that's
bring up. Sorry, bro. I'm gonna bring up a
yeah,
picture of your of you, just when you're talking about all this, that people will see what's up.
no doubt.
Seeing if you on are you, or if I Google you, are you on there?
What is it?
If I Google you, are you on there? There we go. You are on there. So no, I'm really enjoying this, and thank you for sharing this. Like the story, I've always wondered where the fancy dancer, and I heard it was like from the 40s too as well.
Hmm.
There's that good looking kid. Oh, I'm trying to
Uncle
find you.
Bro
There
Dustin, yeah, right on.
So go ahead about the roach.
How it was a signifying of aggression. And I'm gonna toggle back here a little bit. We got a hold of my wife's great grandfather, his Japan, in her area of all his stories. And her dad's dad was the one that actually told the story. And they're Cree from Sweetgrass area. And one day they had a group of young men, and they wanted to go to Blackfoot territory to prove themselves, to maybe steal some horses, or count coup. And so when they went out, they split up into two groups, and this one group went down towards going directly into Blackfoot territory, while the other Crees kind of stayed and set up camp. But that one group that continued on, ended up getting killed by the Blackfoot people. And so they were worried about this group. They didn't know that they died, and they went looking for them. And sure enough, they found um, all their their friends, relatives, they're dead. And so they quickly did a proper burial for them at that spot. And they knew that the Blackfoot people were probably close, so they decided to try head back. And so when they were heading back, uh, they went down a valley, and I think it's by Sweetgrass there, that valley there. And they ended up the Blackfoot people ended up coming and catching up with them, and they were on top of the valley, and there was a lot of the Blackfoot people, and they were looking down at the small group of this Cree party below, and they'd be easy pickings for killing them. And so Marissa's Japon there, he started to pray, and one of his helper was the porcupine, and he prayed to the porcupine and said, make me look as many as you are. You know, when a porcupine is scared, it spikes up, right? And it looks like very aggressive, and it looks like there's more of it than there actually is. And so he prayed to that spirit, and he also had another spirit. The helper was with that. I don't know if you could, in the summertime, if you guys ever seen the little heat wave on top of the highway, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
On a hot day, that was his helper as well. And he's like, so he prayed to those two things, and the Blackfoot just looked at them, and they didn't come down to attack them, and it was a weird thing. And then after a while, the Blackfoot they left. Shortly after that, the treaties were signed, and we made peace with the Blackfoot people. But the chief of the Blackfoot people asked, "I want to talk to one of the guys that were there," and it just happened to be my wife's Japon, and a Bad Owl was his name, Muchuhu. And he went and talked to that chief. There was a translator, and they said, how much of you guys were down there when we were up there? He's like, there was only about 5 or 10 of us. And he's like, no, that can't be. We've seen hundreds. We've seen hundreds of Crees down there. And so that porcupine spirit made them look like there was many of them. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think that's whenever I think about the porcupine, I think about that story. And
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's in kind of your area there, and think of all the powers we had as people, which is really cool, right? Anyway, yeah, back to the fancy dance. I was when I was first dancing, there was some rules, unspoken rules of dancing. One was to not touch the ground, and another one was that I always heard was a dancer will always tell their story of who they are and where they're from. And so I had a big I remember I used to get in shit a lot because I would touch the ground all the time, and I'd do crazy stuff like I'd kick off the center pole, things I would never do again. But I came from a background of hip hop dancing, break dancing, and track and field. And so you could see a lot of that in my dancing, that athletics, and doing all these jumping moves like break dancing and things like that. That's all I knew when it came to dancing as a base. And I always thought it was cool, breakdancing, because you're battling other people and you're doing cool moves. So, I broke that rule a lot, to not touch the ground. I'd be doing cartwheels and breakdance moves. But that was my story. That's where I was from. And I found out that when I dance, it's very spiritual for me, where I don't think about what I'm going to do. Before I go out there, I visualize the dance and what I'm dancing, and I visualize myself already doing the moves I want to do. But when it's time I go out there, I get lost in the song, and however that song makes me feel, I just try to interpret that with my dancing. And literally after the song's done, if I did it right, it's almost like a blur where I didn't know what happened, and I just let my spirit kind of take over and let it dance. And there's some things that you got to kind of get used to before you dance, like the rocker movement. um, for new dancers, when you're dancing, you consciously think, I need to move my head, and you have this rocker on top of your head that's supposed to move with the drum beat.
Mm.
But if you could get to a point where you're not thinking of, I need to move my head, I need to move my arms, and let it happen naturally, um, that's where you could create some magic out there. And so I'm gonna give my formula that I use for dancing for any young fancy dancers out there, to make them not have to think so much when they're dancing. So when you're dancing, the song is broken into 4 parts, 4 starts, 4 leads of the drum. And I like to I know with fancy dancing there's different aspects I want to show. One is smoothness, how you could be smooth and graceful. The other is footwork. The other is your power moves, explosiveness, and the other is your speed. Right. So I broken this down into a formula, like a math equation. And this has worked for me, and to me becoming a champion dancer, and to not have to think about moves and stuff when I'm dancing. So mainly and more often than not, the song will start off slower than the ending. So the ending is going to be fast, the beginning is going to be a little slightly slower than the ending. And so the very first start, I like to, before, when that song first starts, I do something big, like a cartwheel or a jump or something, just to get attention. And then I go straight into smooth moves. So the very first start, if you could be as smooth as possible, doing your rocker, your arm movements, and be as smooth as possible, then you're not having to think of what kind of moves I got to do. You just not got to know, I got to be smooth. When the second start kicks in, I do my footwork. And then you can just play around with your feet, show off your footwork, your cool fancy moves. And you do that for a whole start, the second start of that. So that's half of the song right there. The third start is where I start doing my power moves. So that's where you'll start seeing me hopping on the ground, jumping up in the air, and usually that's the time I do my front flip. Those are all the power moves. And then the fourth start is all about speed, and you want to show how fast you are and your rocker, and you put everything together. And that has been my formula. And so I gave it now everybody knows it that's watching this. It'll help you out. But that's kind of how I broke down fancy dancing. And what I like to do when I dance is I study other dancers. And for some of you, this, especially if those dancers are just starting out, copy. And I know a lot of people are, you get kind of frowned upon that, copying other dancers. But here's what I found out is, you're never going to do the move like how I do it. You're going to do it the way you do it. And it's going to look a slightly different, and it's going to be a way that you can own it, your own dance, right? Your own self. And the way you transition from that move to another move will be different from how I do it, different from how Changku does it, different from how Michael Roberts does it. And so you don't have to think and come up with moves. You could watch other dancers. And I got inspiration from other dancers, but also from like grass dancers and men's traditional dancers, and even the women's categories. I'd watch their footwork and I'd say, man, that looks pretty cool, I'm gonna try that out. And so, if you're thinking about, you need to come up with a bunch of moves, you don't, right? You watch what the champion dancers are doing, and you take notes and you practice it, and then put it in within the formula that I just mentioned, and you're gonna do great. You're gonna do awesome. But if you want to be a champion, this is a different route, right? Some people, they just dance to dance and they love to dance, and however it happens, it happens. But for me, I kind of created it as a lifestyle where I needed to win to take care of my family, because I didn't want to do anything else, right? And so I studied what champions were doing. But you'll find out that 80% will be mindset, and how you think and how you feel and your energy before you go out there. then the 20% is the mechanics, the how to, the moves. And if you could kind of go out like that, you could be a champion, right? And so for me, I hit every goal that I wanted to do as a fancy dancer, from going to win Gathering of Nations, um, when we had that big special there, to traveling to powwows I wanted to travel at and meet different people and have a nice beautiful outfit. um, I've always thought, like, what's next for me? And so our big focus now is sharing culture and helping other dancers and being a bridge to other people who want to learn culture. And so with that, it makes me have to go out and learn a lot and sit with elders a lot and keep writing grants so I could keep doing what I'm doing. And I created a life now where that vision I had when I was young of the crowd cheering for me, I experienced that. And I'm super beyond grateful that I've been able to live out a vision that I had in my mind and make it a reality.
Mm.
And also help so much people along the way and be of value to them. And when I see young dancers, one time I traveled with my bro Eric Mentuck to Lewiston, Texas, and we were also in Louisiana. And I had a cool experience of these young kids surrounding me, and they're like, "You're Patrick Mitzling, right?" And I was like, in it kind of
All
in
the way Louisiana, Texas, you were getting recognized.
yeah, and I just got surrounded, and I was answering all these questions, and then that made me realize that the youth are always watching. They're always
Mm.
looking, they're always paying attention. And so when I'm posting anything on social media or YouTube or everything, I make sure that I leave my problems aside, and I just try to be as positive as I could, because I know that the youth are watching and they're listening, and I remember for me as a young kid growing up on reserve, I was always looking for role models. I was always looking for someone I could look up to, and that kind of got hurdled by um, the people I look up to. They kind of got caught in drugs and alcohol and things like that, and
Mm.
so I was really disappointed as a young kid, trying to find mentors and trying to find people I could look up to. So now I just think that I could be that person that some of these youth look up to, and so I do my best to put my a positive vibe on my
Mm.
social media when people are watching my stuff. So
And I honestly believe, Patrick, that you're so right. The youth, we like. I remember being young too, and you're always looking up to somebody to follow, because there's a lot of us that didn't grow up with that father figure or even the mother figure,
mhm,
and you're looking for that thing to mirror almost in your life. And nowadays, you're so right. Like, once you put something on social media or YouTube, it's forever. It's not
mm,
one and done, and then what people forget about, man, 20, 30 years, man. Oh, well, Patrick Mitzwing, oh, look at him, man, just nothing but positive stuff, right?
yeah.
And you're right, and I think that's so cool that the youth found you in Louisiana. Like, you literally, you can be noticed anywhere, right? So I think what you're doing, man, is awesome. And to actually, I really enjoyed that story with the sorry, man, I'll put me on so you're not looking left and right.
Well, there you are.
I
Yeah.
really enjoyed the story of of the the origins of the fancy dance. I was always curious. I just like you. I heard stories here and there, but never kind of dived into it. I just figured, I'm not a powwow guy, so I figured that was the story. It
Hmm.
was nice to hear the exact origins of it.
Yeah, man. And then one time, so Michael, he was doing this thing at the Choctaw Casino, and he wanted to create this fancy dance championship. And so I got invited as one of the, I don't know, I think one of two Canadian dancers that were invited. I think it was me and Kenny Pratt,
Mm.
and we got invited to the Choctaw Casino, and we battled against all the top fancy dancers in the world. I didn't win that time, but I was so intimidating because they had all the old school world champion men's fancy dancers from Oklahoma as the judges, and so you're dancing in front of them. And so I we drove, we just packed up a van with our gear, and this time I forget when this was, but I didn't have too much money back at that time, and I drove, and we'd sleep on the road, and we did a road trip to Oklahoma,
Mm.
and past Kansas City. It was the first time I went down this area, and we danced. And the cool thing was they gave out prize money to everyone who showed up anyway, which was good. And they housed us in their casino. But I ended up winning at the slot machines, which which was really good because I needed it. But after
Doesn't mean
that,
gambling's good, folks.
I actually don't gamble now, but I put in it was a hope, and so we got the creator took care of us there, and but right after that weekend was they had this Las Vegas World Championship. I don't know if you remember that. I forget what they called it, but it was their first POW, and it was all the champions were there, like everyone. And so we went from Oklahoma to Las Vegas, and it was me, Harold Gadwa, and my bro, and so we danced there, and it was probably one of the funnest powwows that I've ever been to because it was pure dancing,
Mm.
uh, and lots of dancing, and they did it as a elimination system where you had to make it to the finals, and at the very end they announced top 10, and they went through the list, 1 to 9, and I was still standing there, and then number 10, I get called up, and I was so excited. I hugged my bro that we traveled with, and we're jumping up and down. I was like, all right, I'm in there. And so this was the top uh 10 dancers that came, and literally everyone was there, all the champs, and so we danced, and then they announced the winners, and I ended up getting third place, which is so awesome for me. It was a huge accomplishment for my dancing. But what I found on that last competition, when they did the top 10, that I actually won that round, the championship round, because CNT tabulating was there, I think, and they posted the points for the last round, and so I took that as the win, as that was the win right there. We should have had a clean slate and started with the top 10. I would have won it all. But that was one of my biggest accomplishments for dancing. But and it was before Christmas, so it saved Christmas for me that time.
Well, kicked in, yeah.
So yeah, that's one of my fun power stories that I have. So yeah, man, I don't know any other. I don't know where we want to lead this from here. If you have any
If
questions.
you guys, yeah, if you guys got any questions and just put them in the comments and we'll bring it up. But I mean, going forward, like you said, I want to go back to the museum. I know you said you guys, instead of you going around, because I know you travel around when we were allowed to actually be in contact with people. We should call it pre-contact. Hey, instead of
Pre-contact,
pre-COVID,
yeah.
we'll call it pre-contact.
Yeah.
So pre-contact, I know you were always traveling around and stuff, and now you got this museum with history, and it's full of all powwow, like every little kind of um thing that is needed to know about the powwow. You got it in there.
In the exhibit, or where?
Yeah, in your exhibit, yeah. Or is it just
Yeah.
the dances?
Yeah, no, all the dances, and actually we sat down with Tommy Christian to talk specifically about powwow itself.
Mm.
And Clayton Tatusis here said, it was a Sioux celebration, and the Crees never really had that, right? So Tommy talked about that, and talked about how they would dance after counting coup, or after a successful hunt or a battle, that the men would naturally just dance and celebrate those wins, right? And after a while, in the 50s, it became more popular down this area where powwow was. But some cool things that Tommy talked about was, we were, people looked at us as stoic people, really proud. But he talked about how, at that time we weren't afraid of death. We were actually looking forward to meeting our ancestors. So it was religion and Christianity that made us afraid of dying, right? And made us afraid of the being punished. But before that, we had these beliefs that we were just proud and we were ready. We're preparing ourselves through our life to get ready for death so we can meet our ancestors. And I love that part of how we used to carry ourselves, and
Mm.
how a lot of the things in Powell that you see were actually borrowed from the rodeo, like the Powell princess and the grand entry, things like that, were, as I was told anyway, was borrowed, right? And so we
Mm.
integrated that, because usually before that we just kind of went right into dancing, and we didn't have a grand entry. And the that eagle staff that we did carry, um I was told it used to be like a spear, and so they bent that stick to show that we were done fighting, right? We're done battling, and so we're gonna have this peace, and we're gonna bend that spear. And now that's why you see that eagle staff kind of bent and leads the way, because that was our original flaying when we went into battles.
Yeah.
uh, and so that was pretty cool for that. And nowadays, just like Clayton was saying, it didn't have a
Oh,
spiritual
the last one
ceremony.
here.
Yeah, but that spiritual ceremony. But he said nowadays, you could use powwow as a way of teaching, as a way of teaching kids, a way of teaching yourself, and you learn these things like discipline, right? How you take care of your stuff. They say take care of the drum, it'll take you places. Take care of your outfit, it'll take you places. And we battled with that with our kids. Here's my wife beating an outfit for 3, 4, 5 months, or a year, making an outfit. The kids wear it, and then after they're done dancing, they throw it in the tent with no. And so and it's just laying there on the ground or whatever. So those are teaching moments where you could teach them respect, teach them
Mhm.
discipline,
Yeah.
and discipline to learn the songs, because you're gonna get bucked off if you don't learn the songs. The discipline of and the reverence of offering tobacco to drums to learn songs, or sitting with elders. But for me, because Pao has been such a big thing in my life, it has been my connection to culture, right? Even though back in the day it didn't have that uh, spiritual ceremony, it's been my connection to meeting elders and talking with elders and talking to veterans, and learning about dances and hearing the drum and hearing the Cree language, not just the Cree language, but all types of languages, and meeting different cultures. So it's been my university, man, in my life, of how to live and to learn about indigenous cultures. And that's how Powhatans was born, is like, I want to share this with other people. And so we started writing a lot of content on our website, started sharing the content on our blogs, and on our Facebook social media. And I know a lot of people are out there who are disconnected from their tribe, and they live in urban areas, and this is might be all they have as a connection back to their identity. And I learned that, when you say Nixigassen, when you say your name is Patrick Mitsung Nixigassen, it represents your connection, your belly button connection to your mother.
Mm.
And that kind of tells you, like, this is who I come from. And we were really maternalistic, or not maternal, matriarch societies, where we look to the women for a lot of things. And the Indian Act kind of kind of hampered all that, kind of destroyed that, where the women weren't too important according to the Indian Act, right? So
Mm.
they gave the men the power, when really it was the women who had all the power, and we looked to the women. And so when you say Nixigasan is saying I'm connected to my mother, that's my lineage and that's who I am. And so when I look at the world of, like, indigenous people on urban settings who are disconnected from culture, but they're hungry to get it back, is that they're trying to find their belly button. They're trying to find out who they are. And so I use power that way to figure out who I was as an Indigenous person. And that led me to so much other different areas and paths and books and elders and learning my language, things like that. So, you know, I owe a lot to powwow, and my kids live that lifestyle now. They love dancing. I know my youngest son Ari is always like, "When are we gonna go to a powwow?" It's like
Hmm.
I don't know, son. You know, when we'll see how the future holds for us here.
Yeah. No, I've heard of that belly button story. Actually, I heard it here from our Cree teacher, because I
Hmm.
told her I like to go to BC lots, eh? Like I feel when I go there, it's like my home. And she said wherever your belly button is, and they said that's where your I think she said almost like your spirit is supposed to be, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that's why you feel at home when you're at BC. Because I was born in BC, my mom was living there, and then that's where I was born, and that's kind of why I feel at home there. I wasn't there too long, only like a year, I think. But yeah, we're that. I'm just reading Clayton's thing. We were egalitarian societies. Everyone was equal. If one gender has more power over another, then that's not balance. We were living that balance, just for clarity.
Yeah,
Want to
you know, I
respond to
guess
that?
what I'm trying to say is there's way more um, leaning on the women than there is today. You know what I mean? Um, so I think I got that from the Iroquois. There's this guy who went to the Iroquois, and he observed the tribes and seen how much the woman was so important in their tribes, how they took care of the lodges, the preparation for food, the foundation of the tribes. And you know, I just don't study just Cree. I look around and and from traveling all over, I make it a point all the time to go sit with some knowledge keepers within those areas. And it comes back to the women, man, that iskew, right? Iskitu, the fire can't live without the sun. The fire gives us all life. And
Mm.
that's a root word for iskew. So I look at it like that. And I know the men were always important part, but um I
The
know
woman were the glue.
my wife, if I didn't have her home, man, I would fall apart right now. So uh
Yeah. No,
yeah.
like, and you look at like even like our like my family, our late cookum passed on and like 3 years ago, and kind of that was our glue, right, to our family. Now, once that matriarchal person is gone in your family, it kind of like it redevelops into another more, I guess, it spread to the other women and like the daughters or whatever in the family,
Hmm.
and I guess it's a new thing. But yeah, and like you're going back, you're saying instead of just learning about around here, like your area, wherever you are right now, you're looking into the Iroquois, like Tommy Christian, all those stories, and that is why we're doing this. Because there's somebody actually commented on our post when I put Ruben Little Head on there, and he said, I thought this was supposed to be historically about the Cree, and I said, no, we're trying to learn everybody's story, all
Hmm.
Indigenous, because there's always a connection. There's Patrick Mitswing, his stories, and then you go down, to Louisiana. There might be another Patrick Mitswing with a different story, but the same kind of connection.
Yeah.
And the Maoris, man, when I lived in New Zealand, hearing their stories, they had actually a connection to the Anishinaabe, and they said they're pretty much cousins with the Pacific people on the BC. Because one guy said he came to Canada and he was with the Anishinaabe Bay people. I hope I'm saying that right. And he said this one guy started praying, an elder, and that Maori man, he said he understood the whole prayer, and there was that
Mm.
story connection, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's some tribes in Oklahoma. They speak some Cree words within their language as well. And
Yeah,
just from stories that I've read, that they were up in Canada, right, and they got pushed down to the states in that area. So Clayton, here to goat, bro. Here to goat, broski.
yeah,
um,
no, like man, like for a young man yourself, you're wise beyond your years, and you've lived, you're what do they call it? Old soul almost. You hold a lot of knowledge. Like you do hold, I think you were, I always like to say the universe. I know everyone says creator, God, whatever. I like
Hmm.
to say universe, man. And I think the universe chose you as that keeper of knowledge. Cause when you do get older, you're going to share that knowledge, right?
Yeah. I like when people are at powwows and the elders are talking and the guy's like, "I- I'm a humble man and I know nothing." And I never understood that when they would say stuff like that. And, maybe people could chime in, but I gave it a meaning. And these stories are not mine. This knowledge is not mine. I cannot leave with it. And I was just meant to pass it on. And that
Yes.
if you could keep your cup empty, meaning like I'm a humble man, I know nothing, means you're open to learning. And
Mm,
you know what I mean? You're not saying I know everything. And
yeah.
I know some of the things I say, I have elders would contradict it, but it's words I heard from another elder as well. So I just open up my mind and say, okay, and hear their story. And that way I could kind of piece things together. Um, and so, forgive me if I stepped on any toes here today, or if I said something that you don't believe in, or maybe you heard something different. We're all learning, and I'm a humble man, and I know nothing. So,
Hey, yeah, I know. Hey, yeah, you're so right. Like, we come in here, try to be as humble as we can, and we're supposed to approach it, with offering tobacco. But I mean, at the same time, we can't be around each other, so we kind of gotta just, like our Cree elder over here, did a ceremony before we did our last podcast in January. Just for to have a good session, I guess. And we kind of I
Mhm.
kind of smudged around before here too, 2 days ago. So, but yeah, just going forward, man. Like you're like yeah, like some elders hear one story and then the other one's told a different way, and it's like this is how we can start sharing each other's stories and have the masses kind of just watch and learn while we're all learning at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I try to get the lessons, and I try to get the message behind the story, or between the lines. And a lot of it is just like giving value and helping others.
Mm,
And like Tommy said, you're preparing yourself to meet your ancestors, so you have to live as good as you could here to prepare yourself for the next life. So
mm.
I've taken that as kind of a way of living from the stories that I hear. So if that helps anybody.
Yeah, no, Tommy, man. Wow, man. I didn't even really have to say anything yesterday when we were listening to it. I was just like, like it was just,
Right.
oh man, you don't need to say nothing, man. He just tells you how it is, like like it's going one thing, and all of a sudden, boom, he brings up a lesson on it. And you're like, wow.
Yeah, which is so awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, bro.
Mind you, he started with bringing all that knowledge in at your age and a younger age, and you know what I
Mhm.
mean. It's kind of like you might even be on the same path, and like we might be FaceTiming each other virtually here in like 30 years, and like, and say, Pat, you remember that podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
And then all of a sudden, yeah, and then all of a sudden you're just gonna blast us with knowledge and like ooh, right at the end there, eh?
yeah.
And maybe by then we'll be able to give you that virtual tobacco. Like, phew, who knows where technology will
It'll
take
disappear in my little transport thing here.
us. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I
Tell
got
it.
it, bro.
Yeah, yeah. Right on. Yeah, man. No, I thank you for coming on last minute, man. And I like you guys. I was supposed to have Ruben Little Head on, and he something came up really quick, and so I asked Pat real quick to jump on, and yeah, he's more than willing. And yeah, a lot of you guys, if you don't know who Patrick Mitzwing is, he's a champion fancy dancer, and he's also a young Indigenous entrepreneur and motivational speaker. Man, this guy's doing it all, and yeah, follow him. You have your own website as well, eh?
Yeah, this is my name, patrickmitzling.com. Yeah.
Yeah, man. If you guys want to get a hold of him, like he's a very well-rounded young man, and he just literally taught us about the origin of fancy dance, If you guys want to replay this video, you can find that out. And yeah, you know what was bugging me through this whole thing? Maybe it's just my
So
OCD. Your green screen. I was like, I wanted to text you, put a picture on.
I was gonna, but I think I have a slightly worse internet than you do, and so
Ah,
once I put on the green screen, I'll be choppy and
oh yeah.
start
I didn't
breaking
even think about that. Yeah, I guess the green screen would take bandwidth.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Anyway, bro.
guys.
Hey man, yeah, there you go. That's the magic. Yeah, if we turn ours off, that's literally what you'll see is our little green thing there.
Yeah, you're like, man, that green screen is just bugging me.
But hey, just like I do my normal podcast, I want you to close out with a few words of whatever you want to say, and yeah, and that's it. And with that, you guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. We will be on live again tomorrow, Friday, right?
Yeah.
Friday tomorrow. My Uncle Winston will be back on from 12 to 2. We might have a guest with him. We're not sure. But remember, this is going all of February Indigenous Storytelling. You're going to hear different stories. They're going to be Cree, Dene, Lakota, Sioux, whoever we can find. We're even trying to get some Maoris on here if we can get that right time zone going with them, and maybe some Aborigines. And yeah, we just want to hear Indigenous stories because in the end, they're all kind of the same, but they're totally different, if that even makes sense. But with that, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. Like our page, our school page for the month of February, if you want to keep tuning into these. With that, you guys, we'll see you soon. And Patrick, go ahead, close her off.
Yeah, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me. I know you could have been anywhere in the world right now doing whatever it is that you want to do, but yeah, you spent some time here, and I appreciate that. Hopefully I gave you some value. Some of the things I tell my kids are, we become what we think about, and I don't think a lot of people know that they could control their thoughts, but it's like a muscle. You got to work on it, and your thoughts kind of will navigate you of your who you become. So I explain that to my kids, that your outer world is a reflection of your inner world, and that goes back to our Indigenous teachings that I got from Tommy. It's to work from the inside out. And so if you're ever going through any problems, struggles, traumas, look within first and see what kind of work you could do internally to change your outer world. And so with that, thank you so much for being a part of this, and hopefully I've been of some value to you today. So muistas, we'll see you again.
Hi.